and welcome to the Reality Bang. I'm Johan, your host for the session, and thank you for tuning in. That's it. If you guys want to contribute our topics, have any questions, or just want to tell us what an amazing job we're doing, you can reach out to us at 6364252164. So, for this edition of the Reality Bang, we are going to be touching upon the Jallianwala Bagh massacre on April 13th, 1919. And of course, we have Johan here with us. It's great to have you back on the show.
Been quite a while, huh? It's almost, I think, close to a month since we both have done something together.
Oh
So
yeah,
yeah,
it's very long.
good to be
So
good to be back after a long time. Yeah.
great to have you back.
Yeah.
So let's jump right into it. So my very first question is now what exactly happened on April 13th, 1990, 1919, sorry, at the Jallianwala Bagh, and why is it considered one of the darkest days in Indian history?
Oh, it is without a doubt one of the darkest days in Indian history because I don't think an incident like this has ever taken place in India. And unfortunately, the reason why this massacre happened is like the reason is is as small as an ant. It's such a small reason that that was there for the British people, and
Yeah.
they ended up doing probably one of the bloodiest massacres that's ever happened in history. So. We will get later on with what led to the whole massacre, but the incident, I think, the small history that we need will at least know to understand this is there was something called the Rowlett Act,
Yeah.
and that act was given by this one by a justice, and that justice, he came up with his act, and that this is you know uh, one of the most satanic acts, I would say, because this act basically allowed the British officials, the British power, the police, they could arrest anyone without any warrant. They could have trials without no juries. The
Mm,
ones who are getting arrested, they had no right, to know what are the charges. They can
mm,
arrest them whatever, whenever they want. So basically, any sort of an of they can be someone who haven't even committed a crime, and the British can just go and arrest them in the middle of the night if they want to, and Indians can't even argue with that. That it reached that level, it reached to that point, what they had done. So this was considered like, before that itself, a lot of laws were passed that suppressed Indians freedom during the time, but
yeah.
this is the one that made it worst. Like, they had literally no freedom. British people could do whatever they wanted. So I
Mm,
think, because of this incident that's taken place, where basically Indians were stripped off of all their rights, and whatever they could do, uh, they ended up protesting for it. A lot of the Indians just kept protesting, day and day, and the cities were packed and crowded. Amritsar, or people say, like, Amritsar, the streets had close to more than 20,000 people on the streets who were protesting continuously because of this. And there were specifically two people named Saifuddin Kichlu and Satyapal. These
okay.
were these were the two people who were like the national leaders, especially in Punjab, because at
Mm,
that time Punjab had a huge population of Hindus and Muslims, so
yeah.
and Sikhs as well. So this is where these are the two, like, national leaders who are really the face of, like, that's fighting against the British at that time.
Mm,
And these two ended up getting arrested, and
oh.
so they got arrested and they were sent away from Punjab, and
Mm,
this created a huge furor in Punjab during this time, because these are two people, or as it is, they're getting suppressed by the government, and here you have two people who are their leaders, the people that they're looking up to, and they themselves are getting arrested, and they couldn't stand that. So they were really, there were riots happening. There were people, they had gone to the governor's like residence, and they had gone to the government, to the legislation, the assembly building. They had gone there outside and protested, asking for what they wanted, but unfortunately there was no response coming from them.
mm,
So on April 13, 1919, they ended up gathering in this place called the Jallianwala Bagh. Now,
okay.
Jallianwala Bagh, for those who don't know, it is actually a garden. It was given, it was a garden of a family itself called the Jallianwala family, who were ruling the Sikh territory at that time, and
Mm,
it was a garden for them. So, it was like, during rainy season, it was used for crop. They used to plant crops, but the other rest of the year they would use it as a gathering. People would meet a lot of times,
mm,
and it was like a place for gathering for the Sikhs and the Hindus and anybody. So
okay.
that they gathered over there, and unfortunately that day also coincided with something called the Baisakhi. It's a traditional festival in Punjab, in
Mm,
especially in the Sikh community. It is a very significant day for the Sikhs itself, and it's a very important day for them. It's almost it's you can compare it to like how important Easter is for us Christians. That's
yeah.
how important Baisakhi is for them, and it's a traditional festival. It's the start of the harvest season. So
Mm,
the farmers and traders, they bring their crops of wheat and rice, and they bring that as a way of basically like somewhat like a positive sort of a more thing, or as the beginning of the harvest season has begun. And as we're all aware of the fact that Punjab has a lot of farmers and traders are that still today, and it's very sad that they're still fighting for what for their rights. and
yeah.
uh, and this was like some sort of thing that brought them and happiness, a motivation that this year good crops will happen. So these people ended up coming at the same time, and they were gathering. Uh, f- uh, this festival also has like dance, and a lot of these horse races happen. So it's a
Mm,
huge festival that happens, and it coincidentally it happened around the same time. But here is the thing that a lot of people don't know. There's one person called the Reginald Dyer. He's the
okay.
commander who got appointed in Amritsar during that time, because a lot of the riots were happening. So he was called to basically what British people would call controlling the crowd, and their means of controlling the crowd is suppressing them in every and stripping away with them with all the rights that they have.
Mm,
And he is, one of the most cruel-minded people. And for the British people, he was a completely different person, but for
mm,
the Indians, this is a man who showed no mercy to Indians. And it's very unfortunate how what happened. So he ended up setting up a curfew during that time, starting at 8 o'clock. The
okay.
8 o'clock at night.
Mm,
9 o'clock in the morning he passed this curfew, and it's that night 8 o'clock this curfew would happen.
mm,
Plus, he banned any gatherings happening. None of the gatherings was allowed during that day. And despite that, also, the gathering was told to them in every language, in English, in Urdu, in Hindi, in Marathi.
mm,
Still, nobody was listening. And they, still gatherings were happening. And the Jallianwala Bagh, the garden is right next to the Golden Temple over there.
mm,
So because a lot of these farmers and traders were coming and attending all the watching the dance events and the horse races, police officials came, and the police people chased away all of them from that event. So
oh,
they ended up leaving that. Coincidentally, a lot of them ended up coming to the Jallianwala Bagh,
mm-hmm,
which had a lot of the other protesters also who were protesting against the uh, both the national leaders who got sent away. And because due to this coincidence, close to 6,000 people were present there. So initially they saw 6,000 people. Eventually, before the incident happened, I think close to 10 to 20,000 people were there in the place. So this is a huge crowd of people of the you're talking about Hindus, you're talking about Sikhs, and primarily Sikhs, and talking about Muslims also over there. And somehow the intelligence the police got to know about this, and they found out about this. So the governor of Amritsar itself, his name is Michael Dwyer. I know a
okay.
lot of people consider him to be the person who is really the behind this entire incident that took place. He's the one who gave permission to Reginald Dyer, the commander who had just come in. He
Mm,
gave him the permission to basically take how many ever people he wanted to, and shoot them if they didn't listen to him.
oh, damn. Okay.
So he got the permission from the governor of itself. So Reginald Dyer took 50, I think 50 to 80 of his men, I'm not very sure, I think 50 of his men he took to the place. And Jallianwala Bagh is close to, I think I'm not wrong, it's around 200 yards.
Mm,
It's a massive ground, and the walls are like close to 10 feet. And they
oh,
have
okay.
So there are houses that are like 2 to 3 stories of height, that is, also in front, that is guarding
mm,
the thing, and they have like very narrow doors, very narrow doors. So what? So here is, the incident that ended up taking place, where Reginald Dyer ended up, bringing 50 of his men. He
mm,
blocked all the doors, and he ended up, going inside. And let me remind this: 6,000 people who are, maybe 20,000 people who were there at the incident, none of them created any issue. This was a silent protest. This was not a protest that, was had any blood in it or anything. These are
mm,
just people who went gathered over there to protest, and they just spoke. That's the only powerful voice that they ended up using. They spoke. And this is something that triggered the British people, thinking that, this will end up ruining their empire. And that's why, they ended up taking such harsh decisions, to the point of this incident where he came, took 50 of his men, and just without warning them, ended up shooting all of them. Yeah, and he started right in the middle of the crowd. He didn't start by, trying to scare them by shooting in the air. He
mm.
just ended up firing at all of them at one shot. And see, people, there was a lot of blood, and it's probably the bloodiest day in Indian history, where you're seeing, so people just running around. There are people who have died because of the stampede itself, where people have stumped on them and they have been crushed, unfortunately. So apart from direct getting people directly getting shot because of the stampede, a lot of people died. And another thing a lot of people don't know is, in the middle there is a well. There's a big well. So people tried jumping into the well to protect themselves from the from the
Mm.
shooting, sorry. But towards the end, when they found close to 120 dead bodies in the well itself.
Oh gosh.
So this is, so there were around 50 troops, and there was 1,650 rounds non-stop, and he ended up shooting for 10 minutes continuously. 10 minutes continuously he ended up shooting. And he has gone telling around close to 320 or 330, around this, approximately around these many number of people have died, is what he said. But
Mm,
in reality, more than 1,000 people died. And
mm.
till today we don't know what is the actual count that happened, because 1,000 people, there were 20,000 people who had gathered, according to what people said.
Yeah.
If 20,000 people are there, and there you're talking about 6,650 rounds of 10 minutes continuous shooting,
Mm.
I don't think it's just, small number. That people are
Yeah.
saying the
It'll
count
be
is
more than
unpredictable.
6,000 plus, I guess. More than that, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, that's the thing. It's very, people still don't know the count that actually happened.
Mm,
So so many, there was so much blood. And here is where I always say the Reginald, that people say Reginald Dyer is a cruel person, because he started the curfew at 8, and
yeah.
around evening around 5, I think this massacre happened.
Mm,
And in 10 minutes, this man has killed over 1,000 plus Indians, and just left just like that. After killing them, they left just like as it is. And after 8 o'clock, the curfew began.
mm,
So because the curfew began, they couldn't even take the wounded people out there, to the hospital or anything. So because of that, people, died because of those wounds, and
mm.
overall resulting in more deaths. So, I think that is one of the reasons why the curfew itself happened, so that, towards the end, there will be nobody to help them towards the end.
Mm.
So I think that's why it is such a planned, a planned massacre, that, apart from the shooting itself, there are so many people who died, and it was intentionally done, the entire thing. So
Yeah.
that's why, it's one of the bloodiest massacres. It's the worst massacre that's ever happened in India so far.
Yeah. So, like, if we see, like, throughout the events of history, like, take World War or take Cold Wars, for example, now there were various events leading up to it. So, for
Yeah.
this particular massacre, now, what were the events leading up to the massacre, like, including the Rowlatt Act and,
Mm.
the rising unrest in Punjab?
So you said it right. World War is the first, the big is where it all began. So like I said, colonialism is the main reason behind the entire thing. and it is the cruel way of how British people were ruling that started all of it. So
mm,
it started with World War only, where the British Indian Empire was contributing huge to the British Empire itself at that time. By during the war time, a lot of the Indians were sent for war. So they sent a lot of the Indian men. I'm talking about close to 1.5 million soldiers were sent from India,
oh
and a
wow.
lot of them were Indians itself, and
Mm,
actually everyone were Indians. So these Indians were sent for war, and throughout the years, if you actually look at it, Indians we have trusted in some way or the other. They've had some hope from the British people that one day, that they'll get self-governance. So
mm,
that's how it's even began. Earlier last year we had done an Independence Day special, right? And they had
mm,
spoken where the speaker, our staff, Mr. Epchirin, he spoke about how British ended up colonizing, and how
yeah.
slowly, one step after the other, they slowly ended up conquering each and every place. And if you look at it, it is also, you can look at that as Indians basically trusted the British people for the better future of the country. And
Mm,
they got blinded by the British people, and British people took over, suppressed them to the point they wanted to basically whitewash this country and make it their own, just like they where many other places that it has happened. So Indians, there's the entire history of Indians trusting British people, and this was one of the incidents where Indians, a lot of Indian leaders itself, you can talk
mm,
about Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Annie Besant. A lot of
mm,
these people itself were like very supportive, positive about this, and they thought, this contribution can give be that loyalty can be earned through this. But unfortunately, this is also one of, it's very sad that happened, because all the soldiers that returned, they got nothing in return, because there was none of the rights were in terms of the law and the rights of the Indians. Nothing changed in
mm,
terms of political reformation. Nothing had changed, and economically, it just got worse, because one of the things about the World War is that it ends up affecting the economy, right?
yeah.
Every time every World War has affected the economy, and it did. There was a massive inflation because of the war, and this ended up bringing a huge damage to India. And food, there was food itself, there was shortage of food, so people were dying of hunger, and they were really having a tough time. And there was unemployment of the soldiers itself. Even after the war, there was no like future that was given to the soldiers at that time. And also the Spanish flu happened that time. A lot of the
Yeah.
Indians, yeah, it affected Indians. A lot of Indians also passed away. So because of this unfair treatment by the British people is where there was the rise of nationalism, where
Mm,
you had a lot of movements happening. A lot of freedom fighters started to begin and started to fight for their rights. And this is where a lot of these parties, and especially in Punjab, there was a party called the Ghadar Party. And they were
okay.
very well known party who were trying to stand up against the unfairness that was given to them by the British people.
Mm,
And British saw this as an act of rebellion, because if you remember 1857, there was a revolt that happened
mm,
by the Indian soldiers itself. That was considered the first ever that's the first time ever Indians stood up like that, in
yeah.
that way. And this somewhat scared that that for British, that this might happen this second time. So British people started putting unnecessarily more laws. They ended up suppressing more Indians in sort of every right. And there were restrictions of travel. There was arrest without warrants. And in terms of media also, they were not really, people were not knowing what was happening in other countries. So there was a lot of killing also happening. People were getting killed for unnecessary reason. People getting arrested for unnecessary reason. And that's where the Rowlatt Act came, and that is what made it even worse at that time, I think, because
Yeah.
I'm, as I mentioned earlier, it's a law where there is, you basically have no rights. There are trials without juries, arrest without warrant. You can just put someone in trial without even telling them what is the reason. You can charge them without them knowing what is the charge. And because of this, a lot of the Indians who are there in the legislative assembly, they ended up walking out for this. And this is where the protests ended up happening because of the Rowlatt Act. And
Mm,
these protests, I must say, none of them were physical. They were peaceful protests. A lot of them, they were just, these are just people who are gathering, people, this was fasting, you're talking about praying, and they were just gathering in small, in in certain areas, and they were protesting. They Nothing went physical or anything. And Punjab at that time, Punjab has always been known to be, very martial in that way. I think they've
Yeah.
always been standing up for their rights, and they've always stood up for what they think is right. And they have sent a large number, more than 350,000 soldiers were sent actually from Punjab. And again, they affected them like any other place. And the two leaders I mentioned, right, Saifuddin Kichlu and Satyapal, their arrest is what ended up making it worse for them. And eventually that's what led to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre that I mentioned, right, where people ended up gathering there. And people the where Reginald Dyer, the commander, thought that this is something that's going to be like another revolt like happened in 1857. And because he had manpower, he ended up doing such a horrible incident.
Yeah. So, what impact did the Jallianwala Bagh massacre have on India's freedom struggle? Because, as we know, like from then, a lot of events have taken place, and eventually we did get our independence in 1949. So, what actually happened? Like the main
It
impact?
Hmm. I think before this, I think Indians completely lost their trust to the British after this incident had happened. They
Hmm.
had no hopes from the British, because earlier at least you had a history where they are having some hopes with the British, and now after this incident happened, they realized that British have no, they genuinely do not have any, you know, uh, s- uh, love for them. They have only one aim, to come to the land and and conquer it. That was their primary aim. And this is, I think, I think one of the things is it psychologically affected the Indians, mostly. And I think this was an absolute shock, because they did know that some people were getting killed, but this is a massacre that's happened. And they didn't and if you look at the incident, it is, you're talking about more than 1,000 people dying. And this incident, just letting you know, this incident took place only for 10 minutes. Just
Okay.
10 minutes this incident took place, and your more than 1,000 people died. Till today, this massacre has had a huge impact, in India.
Hmm.
And till today, they go to the Jallianwala Bagh every year and do, pray, give their tribute to all the people who had passed away. And that well that I mentioned, right, in the middle, where
Yeah.
120 people, it's called the Martyr Well, because there were 120 bodies found over there. And I think because of that, it was like a national grief at that time. People were in anger, people couldn't believe something like this was happening. And there was like an emotional shift. And this is where, uh, the freedom, the where nationalism really started coming at this point, where because the such a massacre is, one, you need to understand, this was something that had affected the Indians, but also in a way, uh, if you look at from the British standpoint, this was a very different thing, because uh, Reginald Dyer, he was really, commended in British at that time when this happened. People thought he was a hero. People, thought he was doing great things. But if you look from their side, they had British people were the most powerful country at that time, and they just wanted to take one country after the other for, and the British army officers, looked at him like he was some hero. Until today, it seems like that. But a lot of people also realize that this is something that's going to also put a huge stain in the British rule, because you're talking about British Empire that has killed 1,000 people for a very small reason, right? and
Yeah.
i think I think this, and the fact that British people are glorifying something, such a horrible incident that's taken place, when you look in reality, it's an incident where just happened for 10 minutes, and so many people had come. And this 10 minutes of incident is, is what eventually ended up, where you saw more movements coming. You saw people starting the boycott movement happened that time itself, that time only,
Yeah.
where people stopped using any of the British products, the British clothes. And people, a lot of the schools and colleges that were run by the British people, none of people were boycotting each and every one of that. And that whole myth, of British people being the saviors, completely washed away, because you're seeing the other side of where British people have completely shown their power to a point where, they basically said that, these are that we do know the power is the only thing that they wanted at that point. And
Hmm.
they thought that they could end up taking over a country with, and the once power reaches to a point, reaches a point where they have completely not realized, what is the kind of impact that it's going to have, what that so much blood is going to go, there's so a lot of blood, there's a lot of lives that's going to be taken. But in the name of power, all of this was taken. So I think that whole understanding of that whole myth of, British being saviors, everything completely went,
Yeah.
worldwide during this time. And a lot of the revolutionary movements ended up starting around that time only.
Hmm.
And even Winston Churchill, someone who, if you look at it, he was, for Indians, he's not at all a hero. He's really someone who has suppressed Indians in many way, but he himself, was disgusted by this act,
Hmm.
mainly because it's going to have a huge stain in the British Empire. So I think that entire assumption of what British Empire is completely got washed with this massacre. And
Yeah.
that's why all these movements began. And that's why I think more than anything, I think it's a very psychologically it's impacted the Indians, this entire thing. So I think that entire image broke, and that's why all these revolutionary movements began there.
Yeah. So who was Udham Singh, and how did he avenge the Jallianwala Bagh massacre years later, of course, because eventually when we did get our independence, there were a lot of talk about after this particular massacre, it sparked a lot of revolution, as you said earlier. It sparked a lot of revolution, which led to the the final
Yeah.
independence struggle. So what? So who was he, and what did he do?
He is, for the people in Punjab, for the people, for the freedom fighters, for the people, who have been deeply affected by this. This
Hmm,
man is an absolute hero. But,
hmm,
before saying anything, I'll tell this the incident that's happened. He's someone, his parents passed away when he was very young. So he grew up like in an orphanage. And, but at the age of 19, he actually witnessed the massacre himself.
oh,
So, so Udham Singh was, he was 19. He was just a teenager. So he saw the massacre. He was I don't know if he was present while the massacre was happening, but he did see, the he did go to the Jallianwala Bagh and saw, the those many people lying there dead. And this was a huge, shock to Udham Singh, because also this guy has grown up around people, where he's grown up in a world where he's seen British people completely suppressing Indians. But this was
yeah,
not this was beyond that. This was just absolute control that has made, blinded a person to the point, that the fact that there was lives, that was taken, was not even seen or considered. It was their thought, assumption was absolute power is what they thought, is the reason. And he knew that, like, he knew that the fact all of this has happened, he knew there is no remorse that was, they had for what they have done. They felt like, it was something that had to be done, and and he knew all of this, which is why, I think it fueled a lot of anger to him, which is why he ended up leaving India and he traveled to other countries. He was
hmm,
in US, he was in Africa, he was in a lot of other European countries where there were other Indians there itself. So these were like a lot of these Indian uh, revolutionaries, who had gathered like on small community there itself, and they were trying to talk about, the kind of injustice that the British people were doing to the Indians. And they were trying to somewhat start and spread that out, and he was also involved in those groups. But
hmm,
the biggest shift was when he moved to London. He moved to London and he was doing every odd jobs over there as possible. And he had he had joined the community there itself, but here is the thing, those people were all like silent protesters.
hmm,
They were not protesters that were, going around and telling, taking with the flag and insulting British people, that their lives would go basically if they
yeah,
did like that. But he did what nobody would have ever thought. the Michael Dwyer, he was the governor of Punjab that time. He had gone back to Brit at England by then,
mm,
and he is considered, and they say he's the architect behind the whole massacre. They said he's the one who basically gave the approval to the brigadier general,
mm.
and he is the one who approved the whole thing. So what Udham Singh has done is, there was some meeting that took place, I think, in some hall. Udham Singh somehow was able to manage to slip through that in that event. He's gone and he has shot the commander, the colonel,
Oh,
the
okay.
Michael Dwyer. So he ended up sure, and there's a movie called Sardar Udham, there is, which is about this guy.
Mhm.
And do watch the movie. It's a brilliant movie, and it's the what's interesting is it doesn't talk about the him assassinating. Although that's what he's known for. The movie is not famous for that incident. It What is shown is after that interrogating him, what had happened. And that's where the entire they show back the story of how Punjab was being suppressed by the British people and the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. And he was also became friends with Bhagat Singh at that time, this guy
Mm,
Udham Singh, when he was in after the Jallianwala Bagh, because Bhagat Singh was very young. He saw this incident and he himself wanted to start. So he was very young when he started a revolutionary. Udham Singh was part of that. So, uh, eh, to the people who were part of the incident, he is considered an absolute hero, because these are people who have been deeply affected by it, by this
yeah,
incident. And the fact that he ended up taking the life of the person who was behind all of that, in Punjab, he is still considered like a hero. And even in the trial, he went and he was still criticizing the British people at the trial in the court. And the fact that he got arrested, he did not he had no he had no feeling, he never felt bad the fact that he was getting arrested. He ended up getting assassinated too eventually,
mm,
for this incident. He ended up killing, a very important figure in the British government, and eventually he ended up losing his life. But in the place, he's considered to be a huge martyr.
of course. Now, my final question is now, what should everyone take away from this incident, and why is it so important to remember the incident, especially today?
I think I want to keep this short because as you've spoken and pretty much a lot of this.
Yeah.
But I think one thing we need to know is the fact that how much power can blind a human being
Oh, yeah.
is one lesson that you can see in this, because you're seeing someone, they had if you look at the entire massacre, even if you look before that, if you look at all the protests that's happened, everything that the Indians have done, British people didn't even have any fair reason to take the life of those people. They
Mm,
had no valid or fair reason at all for this,
exactly.
but because there was power, because they had money, because they had guns, they just in the name of what they would call cleaning the country or whitewashing it, and
Mm,
they wanted to conquer the entire place. And when they're seeing that failing, they did, they even taking a life is something that didn't bother them. So
yeah.
thousand people were more than thousand people's lives were taken, were gone doing this. The governor who approved this entire thing, and he felt he had no remorse over the decision that he had taken. It somewhat tells you like how power has blinded an entire bunch of people, and how sometimes when you have so much control in your hand, even the small decisions that you take, I think how eventually the amount of impact that it might have, because he was not just a person who was in charge of a state, he was in charge of a place where there were people living their lives, and one decision he takes can impact the daily lives of any other person in every sort of way, financially or psychologically. And it never bothered him what he ended up doing. And I think even in the Bible we have heard so many stories of how power overtakes and ends up ruining a person completely, right? And
Yeah,
I
it
think
ended
this
up
is another,
blinding them from, what they were initially supposed to do.
yeah, what they were initially known as, and eventually what they ended up becoming. It's like seeing two completely different people. So I
Yeah.
think one is to understand, this is to give an example of how even death didn't bother someone because there was power in their hands. Second is, I think, just for for people to know, not forget this massacre. This is a history, I believe, that should never be forgotten, because if once the history is forgotten, I think that's such a dangerous thing, because
Yeah,
if you've forgotten an incident that's taken place earlier, that you will not know eventually in the future why, what is the reason that's how, that the fact that you are enjoying a freedom, a privilege, a life, we can we can tell that, that we are enjoying a normal life, that we are in such a position. But you need to understand that if you've forgotten such history, you need to know how many lives were taken. There was so much there was a lot of blood that was taken for this freedom to happen. And this is one of the things that completely, I think this was like the tip of this was like the tip of the iceberg.
hmm,
That was at if you the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. If you look overall the colonialism in other countries, it's really it's very dark if you look at the entire thing that's happened. So I think people should not forget history. That the kind of privilege that we honestly enjoy. You need to understand there is a lot of lives that were taken. A lot of people fought for it, for this sort of freedom we enjoy.
yeah,
And and despite every issue that's happening in this country, we need to understand what previously had happened, so that to understand the situation we are in right now.
yeah, exactly. And with that said, that brings us to the end of today's show. A huge thank you to Johan for joining today's show and giving us this valuable information on the Jallianwala Bagh massacre.
Mm. Anytime, anytime. Good to be back after a long time.
Yeah, very long time. So remember, guys, we air on Mondays at 4:30 p.m. That's it. If you guys want to contribute our topics, have any questions, or just want to tell us what an amazing job we're doing, you can reach out to us at 6364252164. And a huge thank you to our listeners for tuning in this edition of the Reality Bang, your weekly dose of youth power, brought to you by FEBA Online. This is RJ Johan. Hope you have an amazing week.